Do I have a mover and a seconder for that, Deputy Mayor and Alf Filippino? Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. No, contrary carried. At which stage we'll go to item 8, and I'll welcome back the Chief Executive, who hasn't been all that crisp of late, but it's nice to see you here. And I'm welcoming you and your Chief Financial Officer, Ross Tucker, to the forum, and I'll hand it over to you, Chief Executive Wilson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Kia ora, morning, councillors. Yeah, rumours of my demise might have been slightly premature, although in the event that my wife watches this recording, I'd just like to say she was right. She's very wise, and I should have listened to the doctor earlier.
Listen to your wife. Oh, it's very important.
Look, I'll start with the CCO change program, just to update you in that regard. Things are on schedule, bearing in mind that we've got key aspects of that change that need to be finalised and live by the end of June for the new financial year. Specifically, the consultation process that's required for staff changes in relation to this is live right now. The consultation document was released on the 20th of March, and the feedback closes off next week on the 2nd of April. At that point, of course, we need to consider that feedback and take account of it in terms of probably the more detailed aspects of the design, how things will operate, what the reporting relationships are, and such like. I think for the purposes of this discussion with you today, it's important just to say that I will summarise this. We will summarise this for you and come back to you with clarity of around any adjustments. In terms of the proposal itself, the fundamentals are still very much as we've discussed previously, a broader, more integrated development entity with capacity to look at both green and brownfields development in terms of the future Whieke Panuku and some other functions within council being aggregated together, an economic development department located in the strategy and CE's office, retaining sort of capability to drive some economic development outcomes, and thirdly, a rejig in the event space, with in particular some changes to the way that events are branded and represented in terms of value attribution for the ratepayer input there. The other aspects, or the other key aspect I need to mention is the transport work stream. This is obviously pretty fundamentally important. I've made a change to the way that we're organising that, pulled out the transport policy work from the other transition stuff. So it's not going to be reporting through to David Rankin, it's going to be reporting through to me, so that so it's a little bit closer to myself in terms of generating some policy advice on the options for you for consideration in due course. We need to progress, make real, if you like, that shift in terms of council having the direction setting responsibility in terms of the transport agenda and how that will operate in terms of the Regional Transport Committee. Clearly that needs to be enabled by the legislation, and I'm informed that that is still on track to be introduced by the end of June. Okay, so we'll be looking at that with you in due course. We're also working on options in terms of the precise scope of functions, delivery functions for Auckland Transport going forward, and in discussion with the Mayor, there is an intention to have options prepared by the end of April, with a view to workshopping those with you in May, is the sort of general timetable. I can fill you in more detail in a different way, in a different forum. Moving to recovery, a very quick update. The categorisation process, I expect you to applaud this. The categorisation process will be complete by the end of next week. So yeah, that represents 3,500 properties being assessed. I have to acknowledge that it's been a long journey, and obviously for affected people it's been a pretty frustrating exercise in some cases, and you know, that's to be borne in mind, but it is worth just pausing to thank the staff who have progressed those 3,500 categorisations. On the back of that, I can tell you that we're now over halfway through the actual buyouts. There are 622 properties that have settled, and there's quite a number at varying stages of the pipeline, with over 900 values have been communicated, and a portion of those where offers have been made and need to be concluded. So things are really accelerating in that front now. Ministers have continued to agree to shifts in the budget between different categories. I think you're familiar with that story, so that's good. And I did receive a letter this week, a couple of days ago, confirming government's support to proceed with Clover Drive and Wairau blue-green networks. So good progress in that regard. Just acknowledge, we don't need to go into this because there's not much more to say, but you know, the regional deal proposal is sitting with government now, and we're awaiting feedback. We expect that in the reasonably near future. I do note, and several of you were contributors to this, I do note the Project Auckland publication yesterday, which frankly I think was pretty pleasing in terms of the extent of alignment between council and government in terms of growth, economic development agenda, and so on. So I think it feels like a few things are coming together now in terms of our advocacy, our positioning around that growth agenda, and what the government is talking about. I'll leave it there in terms of the regional deal. They've got a challenge to navigate there in terms of having 18 or 17 other proposals around the country to consider, and a commitment to progress one. So not an enviable task. Just a note in terms of value for money related activity. I'm mindful this is getting a lot of focus within the Rev committee, but of course quite a number of you are not on the Rev committee, so it's worth just keeping you in touch with some stuff that's happening in that space. Probably starting with an acknowledgement that we are in a change process here in the organisation to drive a culture of more cost consciousness, more fiscal discipline, and so on. And I think we're making good progress. Recently, we've been focused on making sure that in the capital program space, we're delivering value for money, and that's requiring us to look differently right through the value chain there in terms of how projects are scoped and designed, how they're procured, and downstream how they're managed to best effect. I just make the point that we're putting some systems and changes in place in that regard, but it's part of a sort of broader culture change in the organisation. And related, we've also started, as part of driving accountability at a general manager level, We've started bringing general managers through the Revenue Committee, talking to that aspect of their business and how they're achieving value. So I just note for councillors who aren't on the Rev Committee that over the next year, there will be an opportunity to dig deeper into different service areas within the organisation. And it's useful for us because it represents a good governance discipline and creative tension for the general managers there. Just related and Ross will talk to the detail in terms of finances, just to say we remain on track in terms of savings, revenue, expenditure and the capital program. Operationally, we're $49 million favourable to budget to the end of February. So we're in a good position as we close towards the end of the financial year. And it's not unimportant when we contemplate some of the budget challenges for the annual plan, and Ross will mention that when he comes to his bit in a second. In terms of service performance, not a lot to say there. Ongoing pattern of growth in usage, for example, 6% year-on-year increase in visits to pools and leisure, 8% increase in memberships in that regard. Libraries, pretty stable, slight increase there. Interestingly, my notes tell me that a third of all issues out of the libraries are now electronic. So people uptaking the electronic option in terms of library resources. It's a big shift in terms of the way that people are utilising that service. In terms of overall customer satisfaction, which is something we are monitoring quite carefully, we're sitting at 77% satisfaction in terms of customer interaction with the organisation. That's a 2% increase on where we were at the middle of last year, which might not sound like much, but it is pleasing and the trajectory is good. And I just note that we now have quite targeted customer satisfaction improvement initiatives in each of the main service areas in the organisation. So that's again part of the culture drive in the organisation in that regard. Volumes are stable in terms of building consents and resource consents. I do note that there was a 30% increase in resource consents between January and in February. That'll be partly seasonal, but it'll also be to do with potentially people getting in before development contribution changes. Just very finally, I note the Pukekohe Dog Adoption Centre opened in the last month. The Auckland Domain Rotunda revamp got a Heritage Award. The Arataki Visitor Centre won an award for its environmental education work. And a staff member, Meg Spittle from the Botanic Gardens, won a very prestigious internship to Pennsylvania in the US. So good sort of acknowledgement of the calibre of people out there. I'll leave it there, Your Worship, and hand over to Ross. Thank you.
Good morning, councillors. So yes, we're in the tail end of the annual plan process at the moment. Submissions close 1 minute to midnight tomorrow night, so there's still time for people to get their submissions in. Submissions numbers are kind of tracking in line with expectations. We always want more, want to hear from more people. There's been over 80 engagement events scheduled and some really good engaging discussions with a range of diverse communities as part of that process. The other part of the annual plan process is working through budgets. So the finance team's working across the council group, looking at budget pressures, challenges, and ways to mitigate that. And we'll bring through an update to the budget committee in mid-April. There are a range of pressures that have been discussed previously, things like utility costs and maintenance costs and a range of other things. So we're working through those as well as decisions that you've made, such as approving more buyouts, which has more interest costs. So there's a range of pressures, there's also a range of mitigations, and we'll give you a firm view through the budget committee in mid-April on that. One part of that relates to local cost pressures in the local board space. We have advised local boards, and you will have seen that in terms of dealing with those cost pressures for next financial year, we'll treat that as a transition year, which means that we'll deal with those pressures. We'll find other mitigations to deal with those pressures. Local boards won't be required to change service levels or use their discretionary fair funding top up for this year. There is still a challenge. What do we do longer term? How do we manage that stuff? And some of that will require staff to provide advice. We'll have to find new ways to provide more advice, more information, analysis to support boards in making decisions that enables them to flex their budgets over time to deal with cost variations. So we've got a one-year solution for that, but more work to do for the future. So that's the annual budget process, and I guess also in the report we do talk about credit rating frameworks. So Standard & Poor's have announced recently a new framework for how they rate local government entities in New Zealand in terms of the institutional settings their view of how they see those settings. So it's gone from extremely predictable and supportive to just very predictable and well balanced. So they've got a different view on how much support central government is providing to local government. There's not as much predictability, there's not as much funding support coming through, and at the same time they're seeing local boards having to spend a lot more on capex, taking on more debt, and without the revenue rates increases to support that in a way that makes the credit metrics, the debt metrics at levels that they're comfortable with. And so as a consequence of that, they've now downgraded the credit ratings of 18 councils and three council-controlled organisations. That hasn't applied to Auckland Council. Auckland Council is in a bit of a different position. With the adoption of the long-term plan, our debt metrics look a lot better. Our debt to revenue is low, and tracks down. It's well within prudential limits because of some decisions made through the long-term plan, and particularly because of the Watercare financial separation that enables Watercare to get on with investing in the infrastructure that Auckland needs to support growth and deal with critical renewals without putting that pressure on the group debt. So for those reasons, Auckland Council is in a different situation to the rest of the sector, and so our credit rating is not impacted at the moment. In terms of the financial numbers, so as Phil's indicated, things are looking good. We're tracking very well for the current year. So across the group, in terms of operating performance, about 133 million favourable year to date in terms of group operating numbers. That's driven by revenue being 1% favourable to budget, and direct expenditure being 4% favourable. The revenue is supported by higher regulatory revenue, including more demand for LIM reports, as well as strong revenues through the ports. That's both container volumes and importantly cruise. They've had a good cruise season, so that's improved cruise revenue stronger than expected. On the expenditure side, there's been favourable variances with more staff vacancies than expected, a little bit less maintenance activity, and sort of general cost control, including professional services, utility costs, and those kind of things. For Auckland Council, the numbers are about 49 million favourable overall, 9% favourable on revenue, which is primarily that regulatory revenue, and 2% favourable on the expenditure side. In terms of group debt at the end of February was 13.2 billion and predicted to be 14 billion by the end of the financial year, and that's all driven by the capital program. So $1 billion increase since 1 July, and that's helped fund $2.5 billion of capital expenditure year to date. That $2.5 billion capital expenditure for the group is 95% of budget, so it's sort of tracking pretty close to what we predicted in the long-term plan. Within that, we've got Auckland Council delivering 82% budget, and that's a little bit lower because of some corporate property renewals being delayed, a little bit of less investment in some of the blue-green networks because of the switch to buyouts, and some resource recovery facilities being delayed. That is kind of more than offset by the buyouts. We have $482 million dollars spent on buyouts to the end of February. That is well over budget and will be higher than budget for the year, and that additional spend over budget was approved first by TRIC and then signed off by governing body last month. Auckland Transport, year to date, has delivered 88% of budget. The delays there are mainly related to the delays with the electric trains coming online, coming across from overseas. In terms of highlights there, they've completed the Milldale Bridge across State Highway 1 to connect Milldale to the surrounding communities. It was completed in February, I believe. There's been good flood response work, including Lee Road and Kelly Road upgrades completed. Water care delivering 78% of budget year to date. Key highlights including the southern part of the Central Interceptor Tunnel now becoming operational, going live. Also, Judges Bay pump station installation was completed, which increases the wastewater network capacity in that area and reduces wet weather overflows. So this expenditure a little bit behind budget due to a slow start in the year and just generally a range of projects a little bit behind schedule. In terms of water care projects, I know there's been a bit of attention around the Huia project, the water treatment plant replacement. So the cost figure there, 1.1 billion. That has been in the media and that was in the Water Care Charter. That is the same number that has been in the long-term plan, that was covered through the long-term plan process. It's in there, it's in the 30-year infrastructure strategy. So nothing has changed over the last 12 months. It's in line with what was planned. You will have received a note from Watercare with explaining some of those details. The comparison with the 400 million figure from several years back, is not an apples with apples comparison. That wasn't meant to be a detailed cost estimate. That was just based off some assumptions at the time, and importantly, it's for quite a different scope. The 1.1 billion, although it's kind of referred to as the Huia treatment plant replacement, it's actually what that really is. It's a broader Western water supply program. It includes not just the water treatment plant, but a whole bunch of infrastructure to take water from the dams to the plants. So that's about $300 million of water mains, tunnels, pump stations and the like. So quite a different scope. It's not an apples with apples comparison. The 1.1 billion there is part of the $13+ billion 10-year program, and that is what's enabled by that new model financial separation. So it is important. It's critical infrastructure required to support growth, and without that new financial model, we wouldn't be able to do that without either very high water prices or a different credit rating outcome. As part of the model with central government, there is greater regulatory oversight. So the water care will be subject to oversight by the Commerce Commission, and they'll be very interested in those numbers and making sure that the water care is delivering value for money. And as will you as the shareholder, we've had discussions with Water Care and just yesterday with their finance team around the work we're doing as part of the Better Value program. They're very much on the same page. They're very keen to pursue those changes, innovations, and making sure that we put value for money and challenge things at the heart of all of those, across all of their program. And with the Commerce Commission oversight, that kind of scrutiny is going to be more important than ever. So those are the financial updates. And if we have Gary, I think there's economic updates there. I think we'll just take those as read and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. It was a fairly full coverage of a lot of things. And I have some questions from Councillor Foley.
Kia ora, thank you. Thanks Chair and thanks team for the report. My question does relate to the fairer funding model, and I do appreciate that, and I'm thankful that we've reached a solution at least for this year, and that our local boards will not have to suffer. But I do have to convey, the huge anxiety and turmoil that we threw our local boards into. My question relates to the fact that what we were told at the start in terms of the figures was different. Like, we accepted that and we made decisions based on that. And then it came as a huge shock, not just to the local boards, but all of us, when we were told that actually those figures were wrong, and actually Otara Papatoe, for example, was going to have a shortfall of 1.3 million. They had to pull out of the air, and Mangele 1 million, Henderson Massey about 1 million as well. So my question just relates to that, because we trust the advice, we rely on the advice and the figures that our staff give us. So I just want to know what happened. What went so wrong? Why were those numbers and figures so wrong? Why didn't you consider those cost pressures before, when the fairer funding model was first presented to us? And what have you changed? What have you put in place and changed in your systems to ensure that that doesn't happen again?
Just before Ross answers the detailed question, I think it is important just to frame this. There were some budgeting issues in there, but it's important everyone understands that while the decisions we've taken now in terms of how those cost pressures will be looked at have reduced anxiety at a local board level, they haven't reduced anxiety overall. They've principally transferred it to me, because they haven't gone away. We're going to have to address those in the budget round. We're just going to have to be a little bit more creative than passing it all through to the local boards. It's important everyone understands as well that for the longer term, there will be pressure on local boards to make decisions about budget pressures. That is the whole point of devolving certain decision making and budget responsibility to a more local level. It won't abdicate local boards of having some of that pressure put on them. So I think it's really important we all understand that the future will involve some of that experience that you confront year on year through annual plan processes at a governing body level will be also in the future experienced by local boards.
Yeah, kia ora, and I acknowledge that. I understand that going forward there is a long-term issue here. But my question is really about, at the start, the first time the fairer funding model was presented to us and to the local boards, for example, Otara Papatoe, we're told they weren't going to have much of a shortfall at all. Then fast forward a few months later, they're told actually there was an error, we didn't consider the cost pressures, and now actually you're looking at 1.3 million, Mangele 1 million, etc. So that's the question I'm asking. I understand long term we've got to have a look at that, how we fund local boards. Maybe as a governing body we have to have those discussions long term, but that's what I'm asking about, is that part, the error that was made. Kia ora.
Yeah. So I think there's a number of things here. So when when the work and analysis was done on fairer funding over several years, it was kind of based off a set of information at a point in time, and probably didn't really consider enough that there is always sort of variations and change. Things move, and that's part of, that we've got that with this budget refresh, and the governing body always has to face that issues. In every budget, there's lots of moving parts. This is a big organisation, a big group. There's always things that are moving, and some of these things are driven by gas prices and electricity prices that have moved rapidly. The economic situation has changed between, a year ago. The electricity and gas prices look different now to what they looked like 12 months ago. Things have changed rapidly. So there is an element of things will always vary, and we need models that can accommodate that and work with that. In terms of some of the challenges we've got with local boards is around the full facilities maintenance contracts, that they are kind of set up as regional lump sum contracts. They're not necessarily done by a local board, and that is part of the P17 contracts. We're in the process of renewing those. So as part of P27, we'll be setting up contracts in a different way, and we will make sure that we collect data and we build the contracts from the ground up that have local board by local board cost information, and manage the costs on that basis. So some of that is the way that things have been set up through these contracts, and so what that means is that staff have to estimate and approximate the distribution of costs between boards. Some of that information has not been perfect. Some of that we either hold it at a very regional level or a very, very granular level. So there's lots of data, there is lots of manual work, there is a lot of approximation. So we've got a program of work to get in there, try and improve that, simplify it, get better estimation tools in the short term, and then set up different contractual arrangements so we can work with our suppliers to get better and more accurate costs going forward. So we are working on improving those kind of things, but we can't eliminate that, that variability of costs overall.
Kia ora, thanks.
Thank you for that. Councillor Newman, please.
Thank you. You might not be able to take this, Ross, but it really goes to the cost of huia, because I get that there will be a cost change. The issue is that what Watercare appears to have said is that, a bit like we found out with the Tasman tempest, that taking turbid water after a storm requires further treatment before it can go into the plant, which is something that we found out with the Hunua dams, and that was a cost that was accounted for at that time. The issue is that we knew about the Tasman tempest when it occurred quite some years ago, and that should have informed the thinking around the Huia water treatment plant some years ago, but the change in the cost is so significant, it appears quite a completely rescoped project. So, are you comfortable with that? Because I'm not. I mean, the change is so significant that it makes me feel very concerned about how that project was initially defined and commissioned. There's a very big difference between 400 and something million and something north of $1 billion.
Yeah, I can't necessarily fully answer that. The project, wasn't commissioned. That was just some initial assumptions. They're now in the commissioning phase and working through that design. I guess when I first saw it, I thought that's a big increase and asked those very same questions. And the answer I got was it's a different scope of work. It is not just the treatment plant replacement. It is all these other things as well. So in terms of the water quality element, so there is a need to build more resilient infrastructure and not just only take water that's pristine. We need to be able to make sure that we have plants that can be resilient and cater to a changing climate. Whether that was factored in those initial assumptions, 2018, I don't know. You'd have to sort of ask Watercare that. I think there's probably plenty of opportunity as Watercare go through the process and move into contracting and procuring it to test and challenge every element of that, and there'll be opportunities for Watercare to through the appropriate forum to present to you and explain, have they got it right? So it's about what is the scope. We need to make sure that we are building resilience, we are building for growth. We don't just replace like for like if that's not going to meet Auckland's needs into the future.
Okay, well, follow up, because we know that the earth dams at Waitakere, which only account for a very small proportion of the total water for the Auckland region, that we know that there are elements of treatment that are going to be required. So it just worries me that the figure appears to have been, the initial figure appears to have been quite a low ball, and that raises the question of, is that the last one, or are there other big capex projects that you are being presented with which are potentially lowballed, but the cost is likely to be significantly higher than the initial statement of figure?
I think that's for Watercare to answer, and I think this is kind of where the Regulatory Oversight, Commerce Commission, and that will be really helpful to make sure that these things are properly tested and challenged over time.
Could I have Councillor Ferry, please?
Kia ora. Thank you. My questions are going back to the fairer funding issue. So as the chair of the Joint Governance Working Party, we expected to have oversight of the transition, and it really wasn't brought to us until it became apparent already that there was a problem. We found out at the same time as local boards. So can I just get some assurance that as we work through for next year and the year after that, because it's a 4-year transition, that the Joint Governance Working Party, which includes local board reps as well as governing body reps and someone from Haukura, will be part of that process?
Yeah, so we will, I guess, from a finance perspective, we will, we'll keep doing the work and try to improve the numbers, improve the data, and give advice. And we're happy to work with the governing body, budget committee, joint working party, however that's arranged. In terms of roles between different parties, that's I guess a political question.
Okay, it's just that is the democratic oversight for the transition. So it's important, I think, that be noted and reinforced. The other thing about that that has become apparent, I think, is, and something that was a challenge when we were working on fairer funding before it was finalised as well, is the impact of pools. And so for those boards who have more pools or bigger pools, they had a bigger impact because the utility costs of running pools in particular are high and have become a lot higher. And so one of the things that the Joint Governance Working Party is potentially, or was hopefully looking at soon, is whether in some cases some of those pools, particularly the ones that are heritage buildings, which are also facilities that have had a higher increase in cost, could be in some way recognised partly as regional or sub-regional assets in the way that they're funded. So is that something that could be looking at through the Delivering Done Differently Fund?
So the question of managing some of these assets and pressures sub-regionally has come up a few times. I understand that was considered throughout the fairer funding model, but it all got very complicated. So I understand there's been lots of discussion around that and not a lot of agreement. So we can keep looking at that. But it does. I wasn't involved in those discussions personally, but I understand it's been a tricky nut to crack.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, I think we are, the Joint Governance Working Party is coming back to what has been referred to historically as multi-board services, which is those, I think there was a list of something like 13 facilities that were recognised as possibly having a sub-regional or regional role, which may mean, and it was actually Councillor Baker who brought up the idea of potentially some regional funding for some of those, so we'll explore that further through the Working Party. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fletcher, please.
Thank you. It's good to see you here today, Phil, and I hope you have a speedy recovery. And whether you should be here today or not, I don't want to pose too many difficult questions, but I do think you should take some pleasure out of the report, particularly that area of public support trending in favour of the council, and that's quite a turnaround. And it's on that note I want to ask a question that will possibly have reputational risks if it's not handled appropriately. And in asking this question, I'm indebted to David Long from Stuff for asking some questions that force me to actually go and do a bit of a deep dive into the area of conflict, not just for elected members, but also for staff and management. And that relates to the contracts that we have with a whole range of organisations. We've got a RAFA here today, and we'll have to sign off, but there's things like the Auckland Festival Trust, the APO, New Zealand Opera, then we get to areas like, some of the CCOs and the zoos and the museums, Go Media Stadium, and all manner of events where, as I understand it, it's standard practice that council request as part of contracts that tickets be provided. I don't think it specifies whether it's staff or elected members. So I just want to know what the guidelines that you are putting in place in terms of handling conflict. Now, this relates primarily in my question to you today to staff and management. I for one believe, as somebody who's been very pro Eden Park being financially sustainable, that concerts are important, so it's important we actually see how these things are managed. However, there are issues around should we be taking decisions whether it's funding for the Auckland Festival if we're accepting tickets. So I I know that we've got officers who are attending these sorts of events that are writing policy papers for us. So it's really just to ensure, in terms of probity, that we have some guidelines that are very clear and transparent so that nobody is left to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I do believe, we've got existing policies, processes, approaches around declarations, gifts, conflict management. They are generally well known, but require to be regularly communicated into the organisation and kind of reinforced when we come to particular decision times. So
That's for staff as well as...
That's for staff as well as for elected members. So I don't have concerns in that regard. I think there's the sort of proactive publication of declarations and gifts on the website is also an investment in transparency. So I don't really have concerns about that. I think we're pretty transparent in terms of this. I do think, and I'm not particularly referencing any decisions today, I'm talking generalities here, but we do always have to be mindful when we're coming up to decisions that, or where there are procurement type processes. Again, that's not the type of situation we're in today. For staff, there is an absolute bit of guidance that we avoid that type of contact, hospitality and what have you with any vendors in the lead up to contracts and tender processes running and so on. So I think we've got a bit of stuff we can reinforce in that regard. I will need to take away and have a look at that requirement if it exists in funding agreements and contracts, and I think we should have a discussion about whether that's appropriate. But I do caveat this, and sorry for the long answer, but I do make the point that actually I think it's really important that councillors, elected members, and sometimes senior staff are active in those relationships and take the opportunity from time to time to be hosted. They do represent opportunities to talk to external stakeholders, and those relationships are not unimportant. So it is wrong to think that somehow all of that is bad, despite perhaps some public sentiment from time to time. So I would approach it very cautiously, yes, but not fearfully.
Thank you for that, Phil. I think that is really helpful. So would that have underpinned earlier decisions that, for instance, the requirement for tickets for Auckland Council without specifying staff or elected members, that might have been the case in order that people had greater knowledge on the activities of organisations and so forth?
I have to presume that's the case. I have not been involved in the construction of any of those contracts or putting those types of requirements in there. I think we've got to familiarise ourselves. Where are those requirements? How often? And how many of our funding arrangements do they play? Is that all appropriate? And might there be some exceptions from time to time?
I would really appreciate it if you could report back to us, perhaps through the appointments committee or through the governing body, a little more clarity on this, because I think it is important. We've got a RAFA sign-off coming up. I don't know who has or hasn't accepted tickets for any number of events there. And I just think it's important that we are approaching these sorts of events that are important in terms of the economic activity of Auckland, but in such a way that we're not vilifying staff or individuals, and that we are doing so in a professional and supportive way. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm very happy to take that away.
Thank you for that. Councillor Filipina, please.
Mōrena koutou and mōrena to you, Chair. Also mōrena korua, Phil and Ross. My question is to you, Phil, and it's a two-part question. Firstly, is the time frame for the legislative change. Is there an update on the time frame, please, for Auckland Transport?
My understanding is that government's intention is to introduce the legislation by the end of June. I'm not aware of that having moved at all. Of course, then it needs to go through its appropriate processes, but that gives you an indication.
Supplementary to the Auckland Transport, can you assure me that prior to the legislation, and I obviously around this table know that the legislation at this stage will be passed, that there will be no changes to Auckland Transport prior to the legislative change? Wayne, that's what I'm asking Phil, Chair, is I just wanted to find out whether he can assure me that there will not be any any changes to Auckland Transport prior to the legislative change.
I'll try and keep this fairly simple. I can't give you a watertight assurance that there won't be any change, and there are two reasons behind that, Councillor. One is that there, while the statutory responsibility as the road controlling authority and so on sits with Auckland Transport, there is work going on to look at whether certain of those things might be delegated back to council. There's a discussion about aspects, if low-level stuff, if you like, where it might make sense for local boards to do some decision-making. So there's that type of thing. There's also the practicality that we want to start work on development of the next generation of regional transport plan with a mind to the way that it's going to operate in the future per the agreement that's already been reached by government and which we're expecting to be enabled in the legislation. So, you know, I just put those caveats on it, that we're looking at that now.
And supplementary, Chair, to the response I've just received. So, Phil, the decision-making around any possible changes that could happen prior to legislative change, where does that lie? Is it with the governing body committee? Is it with the Transport Committee? Is it with another committee, or is it with the mayoral office? Is that where the decision-making, because I'm looking at process here because it affects all of us, especially in regards to Auckland Transport. Kia ora.
I think, strictly speaking, the decisions in this space rest between the existing Auckland Transport Board, who, you know, do have responsibilities, and either the governing body or the Transport and Infrastructure Committee, but definitely at a political level, not in an officer level.
Yeah, whawhitai lava, Phil, and Justice Sandra, I'll wish to speak after all the pātai. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Hills, please.
Thank you very much. Just on the water care issue, it was in our long-term plan documents very clearly, because I remember asking about why had it increased. So I guess if that was over a year ago, so I think if we may need more discussions with water care about, but it was on the list of 10 at that price. The question, and thank you for Julie, Councillor Ferry, for working with the finance team on the local board fairer funding. I guess my concern, and I said it in December, was that the numbers could be so out in such a short time. You know, if the 84 million of it was supposed to keep local boards not losing out over that 3-year period, and it seems still a bit confusing that it could change so much. My question, I guess, is, and it's similar that's been asked, but how will we quickly help the local boards change the delegation? Because they really still only have delegation over the LDI, and it's not really fair for us to say you have to find cost pressures, but you can only have delegation over this tiny slice of your pie. It's all well and good to say they need to feel the pain like we feel the pain, but we actually have far greater scope working with you, Phil, over the broader budget of Auckland Council, whereas they cannot reduce their contracts, they cannot reduce staff members, things like that, in a quick manner.
Ross,
Yes, so there are a lot of things. There has been changes to the allocation decision making. There's lots of things within the scope of local boards to change service levels. So in a sort of strict delegation thing, there's a lot that they can do, but in a practical sense, they can only do that with staff advice. Staff can look at variations and can kind of work through things and give advice, look at assets, look at service levels. So there's a lot that can be done under local board delegation, but it requires a lot of staff work, effort, advice, analysis, and good data to support it. So it's all of that support function. How do you do it in practice? And some of these things do take a little bit of time. They can't be done instantaneously. So it's a practical question, really, of how do we do that work, put that advice in time. And I guess this decision recognises we can't do that for the next financial year, but we need to start doing the work so that we can enable it for future years.
And the change, I think it was about a 3-month difference between approving that LTP and the cost pressures conversation. Did we not envisage those sort of jumps with our contracts? I mean, it did seem odd. We're usually pretty good with the, assuming what the ongoing costs are going to be. It was a big jump in 3 months. Are we making sure we're not having that with this budget coming up again?
Yes, we're looking very closely at that. I think there was in terms of setting the LTP budgets, there's been a lot of variations, a lot of new assets that have been created or added, new services. Those things weren't reflected in contracts. They were things that had been requested. Variations have kind of now been made, and it's built into contracts. So I think the LTP budgets were largely based on what was contracted at that point in time, as opposed to a bunch of other things that were in the works. So that that probably wasn't ideal. We didn't do great forecasting around that. We've now gathered that stuff up, and a lot of it is actually being processed through variation. So we've got a lot better picture of it now, although some of it, the allocation between specific boards, requires a bit of estimation. But we're in a better position now. The data is more accurate now, a lot more accurate now than it was then.
Thank you. And this question for Phil, and I would have asked you on Tuesday at Performance, and you may not be able to answer it because we are in consultation with staff, and I know you've warned me about not getting involved in operations, but just on the, it's great to see that you've kept to your word around the development together and the, not targeting dropping staff numbers and things, but I do still worry, and do you have concerns around just where the leadership of the development, we're sort of saying one thing, we want to see this ramped up development, we want to go out there and have empower these teams to do this work, but technically the dropping down of the management, or I guess the leadership, does that come into any problems when you're talking to developers, when you're coming into a room with mana whenua? Like, how do you perceive that will be dealt with compared to, say, the agency with a CEO and a board and execs? It'll be, I'm just a bit confused how we say one thing but it might not roll out the same way.
Well, I do acknowledge, and there'll be staff potentially watching this, I do acknowledge there's a sensitivity there because, you're talking about people transferring in from Eke Panuku and Tātaki who are, materially smaller organisations. So the types of hierarchies that they can operate, the level at which certain types of positions sit, are different, and there's a sensitivity in that regard. But the reality is, we've got general manager positions in the core council organisation with well over 1,000 staff. You know, they're big and we've redesigned the structure to reinforce the critical importance of that general manager layer. There's absolutely going to be leadership at that level, and you know, these are big, grunty and important roles, and I'd defy anyone to argue that they aren't going to have the mana, the influence and so on to lead those important functions.
No, thank you. So, no, it's not a criticism of anyone, and I don't understand exactly how it all works, but I'm just wanting you to know, understand that you will be empowering, delegating, you know, making sure that when these people are out in the field, they have that seniority to enable those conversations, which might end up on your desk instead or something.
No, absolutely, that's the intention.
Thank you for that. Councillor Darby, please.
I think Councillor Hills has probably posed my question. Maybe I won't explore that, but I just want to express some concern about where the future Ekapanuku staff are reporting in. At the moment, they can get decisions made quickly, and I think Councillor Hills was alluding to the fact that they are sitting a lot lower than some of us anticipated, Chief Executive, and less effective and less nimble. And that is something I highlighted when I opposed this reform, and I'm going to highlight it again now. I think we're going down the very track that I was concerned about, a depowered urban regeneration unit. But I'll leave that there.
Councillor, I do need to respond. Most of what you're talking about we can handle by giving people adequate delegations. And this is not about depowering people's ability to make decisions quickly at all. That people are not going to have reduced delegation scope in terms of financial commitments and such like.
Okay, and I appreciate the reply as well. Thank you. I just want to focus on transport reforms. You've assumed direct reporting on the transport reform part, Chief Executive, and I see that at paragraph 31 of your attachment A of a week ago. Can I just check that that decision is made according to this, acknowledges the need for direction from the governing body? What is the difference between the transition director making sure that there was engagement with the governing body versus yourself? And my second part to that is there's no question of the capacity of the transition director in addressing transport reform, which was the earlier intention. Is there not?
No,
First part of the question.
There's certainly no question of the ability of the transition director to have done that, other than for the practical reality that there's a lot of change management work to do between now and the end of June. We want to get, to your earlier point, we want to get the transition in relation to Ekapanuku, the development focus and the economic development focus right. That's a lot of work, and my judgment was that it's best to have David Rankin, that team, really focused on that. Conversely, the options that we need to bring forward to you at the governing body level around transport, you know, that represents a pretty heady piece of policy work, and I want to keep it really close and make sure that we're really doing justice to what comes forward to the governing body. It's as simple as that. It's, yeah.
Okay, and in that paragraph, there's mention of that engagement with including importance of implementing mayoral and governing body direction. So, can you just expand on what you mean by that? What is mayoral direction as opposed to governing body direction? And then in that, can you just, the resolutions from last December, and you may not recall these, and I don't expect you to be honest, but in terms of Auckland transport reform, it was under resolutions F, and there were some very prescriptive things there, and I'm struggling to find out and reconcile where those actions have been, what actions have been taken to reflect on those directions of the governing body. Maybe you are familiar with them. Again, I don't expect you to be, but I'm just trying to get a sense of implementing the governing body direction as per resolution and future resolutions.
Look, we're potentially getting into more detail than is appropriate for this forum. So I think what I might do is follow up after this with a little bit more detail in terms of that transport work program, a briefing for you. I haven't got those resolutions in front of me, but I know in general terms what they say, and we're working on them right at the moment. I think if I'm getting the nuance in your comment, I'm very clear that my responsibility is to bring advice forward to the governing body. The Mayor has a particular role in terms of leading out in terms of policy direction, and I'm obliged to be very mindful of that and working closely with the Mayor's office. But I'm also very clear that at the end of the day, the decisions around this rest in this room for the full governing body.
Yeah, thanks. Probably for the next report, as we get into the thick of the transport reform, Mayor, I'd probably like to see some reconciliation with those resolutions. I think it's F, G, H, and possibly the I as well from December.
We will definitely do that, and Toby's at the back making a note of that right now.
And the Minister is drafting the legislation about the changes right now, and we're making sure that they will comply with quite a lot of decisions in the background of all of this stuff. Councillor Bartley, please.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Just want to take the opportunity to respond to the Chief Executive's report regarding the opening of the Pukekohe Animal Shelter, and just to thank the Mayor and councillors for their investment, the increased investment into animal management to help the city get a hold of the roaming dog situation and the explosion of the dog population through COVID. So this was one of the measures, and I think the councillors that turned up, Councillor Baker, Councillor Fletcher, that attended the opening, and the staff, Robert Irvine, Ali Waitoa, Carly Triska, and all our animal management staff that look after our shelters. Thank you, Chief Executive, as well. So wanted to make that point there. And then also in response to you talking about electronic transactions in libraries, they're all good except for when the system is down. So you still need human resource in our libraries. It's very frustrating trying to find a book when the system is down. I know, I've tried. So really grateful for our library staff. My questions are actually in regards to the economic update. I'm mindful Ross is sitting there, but if I can still put my questions.
Gary is also here
Gary's
for questions if that's relevant.
Cool. I just wanted some kind of reconciliation regarding the statements in the report about the takeaway is that Auckland's housing supply has been responsive to demand, and then looking at the dashboard, about 22% unfavourable to budget regarding development contributions. So I'm just wondering, is that, how do we reconcile those two comments or statements? And is that signalling anything to us that we need to be mindful of, given that we're working on the development contributions policy?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. I think I can ask the first part regarding the statement about the responsiveness of the housing supply to demand. You'll all be aware that since the onset of the pandemic, we've had something of a roller coaster in terms of a surge in demand with the cut in interest rates, and then it's turned the other way with those higher interest rates dampening demand. So it's been a really unusual, volatile time, but the chart that's in the update points to that responsiveness where we've had a 50% increase in the number of homes in the pipeline in terms of those being consented and under construction at any point in time. So really just trying to point out that as demand increased, so did our housing supply, and so did Auckland Council's role in terms of issuing consents and undertaking inspections for roughly a 50% increase in the number of construction sites at one time. So that's really just trying to show that we've had a housing supply that's been able to respond to those fluctuations. It's a little bit eased back now, but later this year, as we see those lower interest rates work through, we should see a pick up again. Now, with respect to the development contributions, I'll pass to Ross.
Yes, I mean, so there are some timing issues with development contributions. The development contributions are paid based off various triggers in terms of, subdivision consents, building consents, code of compliance, and sometimes there's can be quite long lags. So there's kind of a different cycle and time frame for some of that. Part of the variance also relates to development contribution charges. In terms of when setting the long-term plan budget, we assume that the current policy change would be put in place a lot faster and consents would flow through under new policies. Change has been delayed to undertake more time for consultation, analysis, etc. So some of it is pricing and some of it is these kind of lag effects.
Cool, thank you. And one more question. Why do we measure city centre activity in terms of the current state of the economy when we know that a lot of our residents shop in the suburbs, suburban shopping? So I'm just questioning whether that's an accurate reflection. Matrix.
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. The reason we included that, I think there was some interest last year in just keeping an eye on the city centre during this recent downturn. I do think you raise a very good point that most of the household spending on essentials like groceries and fuel, that takes place across the region. The spending in the city centre is weighted more to, should we say, hospitality and discretionary spending. And I think the indicator there was really just in response to the interest here to keep an eye on it as we were through that downturn.
Okay, since we did it for the city centre, are we able to keep a track of spending in our suburbs?
We do monitor spending at a regional level, and we do have a look at the city centre in particular. I think we have a couple of other centres that we regularly have insight into, but we don't keep a track on them all. It's just a matter of getting hold of the data, and that comes with a cost as well. So it just really depends on what the interest is and what that would tell us.
Centrix publish monthly reports on retail sales in all of our districts, and it might be helpful just to have that in the addendum. You'll have access to that. I know that it's an important thing. It's discussed at most BIDs, most business associations have a standing item about what the Centrix reports are for their last month within their areas. It's very interesting, really. There is a displacement if you look at figure 1 on the housing quarterly snapshot, that's a very good indication of what's going on with the economy because it's shrinking, and there is actually a transfer of purchasing from the city to some of the cheaper suburbs. Some of the suburbs like Otahu are doing better than normal, and the new market's doing worse, and that's possibly the chasing of the bargain hunting that goes on when times are tough, which they are at the moment. So I'll just get you to add Centrix stuff. If you're interested in your area, you can approach them and get that stuff from them if you haven't got access to it already. But there is a lot of information there available. Okay.
All the local boards get it, Mayor, for the bids.
Eh?
All the local boards get their bid information, so it's actually done. The work's done.
Okay, we'll spread Centrix around, and we're going to spread around Morris Williamson's good questions right now.
Thanks, Mayor. Just quickly to both Phil and to Ross. I know it's a brief snapshot of things, but I really would be really happy if the group net debt report had a little bit more than just looks like 14 billion by 30 June. For example, I'd like to know how much our net debt has grown as a group net debt since this iteration of the council got elected, because my figures is it was 11.1. If it's going to be 14 for that same year, 13, 3 years on, had a 26% increase in the debt. I think that's something that all councillors should be made aware of in a report like this. I'm also keen to know of that 14 billion, how much more would it have been had the Air New Zealand share sales for debt reduction not been included? So I guess that's my first question. Yeah. How much did we reduce the debt by from the chunk of Air New Zealand shares we sold?
Auckland Airport shares, 830 million. So,
right, so the 14 would be 14.8.
Correct.
Okay, which means would be, my calculation is it comes to about a 28% increase in debt over that time. The next thing I think councillors would benefit from would be to know what our cost of debt servicing is doing. Because I think if you held a general knowledge question around this table, a lot would struggle to know how much money we spend every year just servicing that level of debt. And I would love to see a little, it doesn't need to have much more in this report, but a few more lines, because I found it really hard to know what this means. It says the 1 billion debt since 1 July is due to working capital movements. I don't know what that means. I'd really like to know what that actually means in terms of where it's come from and so on. And it says to help fund a 2.5 billion capital investment. But was it only 10% of that help? Was it 50% of that help? Was it the whole thing? So I'd really like it. Maybe I'm the only sort of sick person around the table who likes to look at these numbers, but I'd really like to know what is happening to our debt, what is happening to debt servicing, and to know that we're up about 27% since we got elected should be pretty sobering to everyone around this table. I'll leave it at that.
Partially, some of the debt servicing will come out of the future fund, and also we need to, but I'm very interested in following through what you're saying, but also we need to know what are our assets going to too. So what's happening to our debt to asset ratio is very important. And the other thing that in commercial properties companies that I own is our interest rate cover, because that's another thing that should be the first thing you look at to avoid becoming a Duval is what is your interest cover. In other words, what is your net profit compared to the interest rate you're paying? And as long as it's in the 2 to 3 to 1, you're okay. But if you're down to 1 to 1, you should be. It's whoop, whoop, pull up. So I've got no problem with asking for that, and I'm sure Ross has got no trouble with providing it either.
Mayor, can I add one? I forgot to add the last question is, when will the water care debt separation be reported as separate to this?
Ross, do you want to handle it?
So the water care debt separation takes effect from 1 July. So in an accounting sense, water care is still 100% owned, so it'll be consolidated into group accounts. But in terms of how we track our debt metrics, etc., we'll have to show it separately.
So it won't change this number because it's still in the group debt, but it'll be reported as a separate element.
We'll be managing their debt separately. There is a transition where they will repay existing debt over a 5-year period, so that'll trend down. But we will make that stuff clearer. In terms of this report, the monthly report, we can look at adding a little bit more in there. We're trying to get the right balance between keeping this simple and high level. There's more information in the quarterly report. But in terms of some of those trends and drivers, probably as we bring stuff through the budget committee for the annual budget, that's probably the best place to, or through those workshops for the budget committee, to get into that deep dive on those trends, the drivers, all that kind of stuff.
But Ross, I was only asking for about 4 or 5 more numbers and a couple more lines of explanation, that's all. It's not a 3,000-page report.
Thank you for that. Councillor Leone.
Actually, just following on from Councillor Williamson's comments around the debt, I did want to just come back to the numbers on the first tranche of airport shares that were sold. So with that 800 million, was it 200 million that actually went on the debt and 600 went on capital works, or what was the numbers in the end?
Well, when we got the cash, we put the cash in the bank. We used it for capital projects. So debt would be lower. So as we spend, we basically don't jam jar it like that. We look at how much cash we have on a particular day. We get money in, money out every day. So it's a question of managing the cash flow is one thing, but if we didn't have, if we hadn't have sold that 830 million worth of shares, we would have had that much more debt. So we kind of manage it on the cash flow sense, but essentially we have spent CapEx overall. We keep spending more and more CapEx, up looking at 4 billion a year going forward. So debt is increasing even with selling down that 830 million. But if we hadn't used it, then funding the same level of capital investment means that debt would have been 830 million higher. Hope that answers the questions.
Okay, so we don't have an actual number of how much directly went onto the debt.
Well, debt, it all kind of offset debt. Overall debt has increased. Debt hasn't reduced, it's gone up because we keep investing in CapEx.
Okay, second question is just to our CE around the regional deal, because I know that obviously we put a lot of work into that, and we've taken huge cuts in terms of our transport plan and so forth. I just want to check if there was any progress on the regional deal from central government.
I think their time frame, that they are currently looking at all 18 proposals, and my understanding is that we can expect feedback by the end of April, but I might stand to be corrected there. As to exactly when they will complete a regional deal, that'll depend on negotiations and so on after that point, if we are selected to progress. Yeah, but we'll get some initial feedback, I think, by the end of April.
Okay, and just a final question, if there's any further update on the midnight tax. Levy.
I can't really comment other than to say that featured in the scope of our regional deal proposal. I don't know if the Mayor wants to comment in terms of ministerial discussions.
I just think we're waiting to see what the public response from the feedback on the annual plan is. Once we get that, in the hope that it's very supportive from the public, we'll go back to the well and say, come on. So I think we're waiting for the results. We're right in the middle of, or nearly at the end of submission time, and so that'll be a major source of information about that. Councillor Sayers, please.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I was just really picking up on the points made by Councillor Williamson. I thought they were very good additional information, important information. And immediately I thought about the need for us to follow the trends of the debt to asset ratio, which you jumped in and also mentioned. So really need to reinforce that, but probably looking at the trend in that would be helpful. So if we're going to report on that, Ross, potentially we can get that historic trend on it. And also, is it worth benchmarking it with any other organisations, councils in the country, or just
I think
trend?
probably it might be worthwhile having a little debate about this at some stage or other too, because its debt to asset ratio is the most important figure, and interest cover. You'll find that some of the biggest companies in the world that we all regard as enormously possible have enormous debt because they're running on debt to asset ratio. So it's the figures that you should be alarmed about are not just the debt itself, how you're covering it. And so I hear there's a little bit of concern about this, so I'm quite happy to bring that forward as something we'll discuss possibly under your committee there. But I'll make sure there's a presentation there so that people get the hang of it. Councillor Hills, please.
Thank you. And just quickly on the debt, because it does frustrate me a little bit. Our assets go up almost 6 billion this year, right?
That's right, and they've gone up 2.5 billion over this period. At the same time, this debt's gone up 1 billion.
In this period, I think the period that Councillor Williamson was talking about, our debt goes up about 4 billion. Our total rate take is about 3 billion this year. But if we wanted to rate fund all that capital instead of debt fund, is it correct we would have to put up rates 125%?
Depending on which time period you're talking about, yes. But if you're talking about 4 billion, 4 billion of investment, that's basically almost just under 2 years worth of general rates.
So the only choice we would have if we weren't increasing debt would be to dramatically decrease our capital investment or put up the rates 125%.
Those kind of orders of magnitude, that's correct.
Okay, well, that just confirms what we needed to know. Thank you, gentlemen. You can retire. We'll go back to, is anyone feeling they wish to comment anymore? Because some of those were comment questions, if you ask me. Councillor Filipaina reserved his right to renew our acquaintance. And I think Councillor Fletcher, do you want to do?
Thank you, Chair. I firstly wanted to address when Phil mentioned the categorisation. And Phil, I want to acknowledge the staff that went to a meeting last night at Mangere, and it was attended by myself and Lotu, plus the chair and the MP for Mangere. And there was about 50 to 55 people who went to that meeting around Te Ararata and with the Blue-Green project. Can I tell you that the response from the group there was positive, but more importantly, with some of the comments, was just acknowledging the staff from Recovery Office, acknowledging the staff from Healthy Waters, and just the team that comes through. So I want to acknowledge all the staff that attended that meeting. We have another one tonight with the Blue-Green Project for Haranea. So look, I just wanted to sort of please get a message to the staff around the thanks from not only those attended, but myself and Councillor Fully. The last one, Ross mentioned the annual plan, and when I was playing representative league and senior rugby in Auckland, when I saw a gap, I took it. So, I obviously went through. It was a bit, like Councillor Baker said, and indicated it was a wide gap. But look, I want to thank Nathaniel Yale Mawai. I want to thank Angeline Barlow and their teams. Why? Because I attended 3 of the Pacifica Whono, South Auckland, Tokelau, Niue, and I know people around this table attended other Pacifica Whono. At the Niuean Whono, there was a comment by the liaison officer for Niue saying this is the first time that council has engaged with them as a Niue community. So to get that, and from there needs, and again, please give our feedback to them, to the staff and our engagement team. So it's just kudos to the staff. Kia ora. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. They'll be pleased to hear that.
I forgot to get a move. I'll move the receipt of this report, and it'll be seconded by Councillor Fletcher, who has a question on it. Or
It's not a question.
she seconded it.
I want to follow on from Councillor Filipaina. I do want to record my delight that we have made progress since Mace Ward has been appointed General Manager Group Recovery, and I would like it conveyed to him just the gratitude that particularly those that live in the ward that Julie Ferry and I represent. It has been pleasing to see some better progress, and Mace has driven that, and for that I am very, very grateful. Thanks.
I've got no other, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you very much for that and the good discussion about it and questions. We are moving to item 9, which is a RAFA, Auckland Regional Amenities Funding.